Okay, we're looking at the surpluses in this video, and it's a quick introduction to them, and in the next video we'll look at how you can use these in different market forms. But really the surpluses are so important in economics because you use them to analyse and also to evaluate any different policies. So policies such as putting an indirect tax on, a subsidy on, a tariff on imports into your country. And it's really important that you can use this idea to see what happens when the government intervenes in the marketplace. Now, let's quickly remind you that a consumer surplus is simply the difference between the price the consumer is willing and able to pay, and that's on your demand curve, remember, and then the amount that they have to pay. And it's a surplus because they're saying we're going to get this benefit from the good up here. That's what I'm willing and able to pay for it. And I don't have to pay that all the time because the equilibrium price is below it. The other idea is the producer surplus, and that's the difference between the price the firm receives, which is, if you remember, the same that the consumer pays, and then the amount that they need in order to make them willing and able to supply. So we're talking about effective supply here, and that's measured on the supply curve. And economic welfare is basically the addition of the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. So add them together, and that gives you the welfare that's going on in the market. Okay, and we'll see that in a minute in the diagram. But before we get that, let's have a little look at what we mean by these surpluses again. So the best definition of welfare, economic welfare, it's like well-being, is simply a measure of the benefit that you get from something less the cost to you of something. So let's, for example, say you eat a piece of cake, then you're going to get some benefit from that, and you can measure that benefit here, but it's also cost you something. So your well-being would rise if your benefit was bigger than your cost. And that's the same for the producer. That if the benefit, which is what they get paid for the good, is bigger than the cost of producing it, then they get some welfare as well. So basically, when we're talking about the consumer, what you're willing and able to pay is going to be measured by your marginal benefit from that consumption. And the price is going to be their cost. That's why it's important to distinguish between these ideas of price and cost when you're writing. So consumers pay a price, but it is in fact the cost to them. And so if the marginal benefit exceeds the price, then they should keep consuming it, because you're going to increase your welfare. From the production point of view, the price that the producer receives is the market price, and that's their benefit, that's the revenue they're getting from it. And then the supply curve here measures the marginal cost, and so they should keep producing as long as that price that they're getting in the market is bigger than the marginal cost of producing. Okay, so let's have a look at it on a diagram, and this is a really important diagram. So we see that as we increase our output from 0 to the equilibrium point, this is your equilibrium point, that you can look at the consumer surplus as this area here. Every time this is produced and consumed in the marketplace, there is a consumer surplus going on. This is the marginal benefit, that's the price they have to pay. That price they have to pay is also the benefit to the firms, and that's the marginal cost of producing, because the supply is marginal cost and demand is marginal benefit. If you don't get that, then you need to go back to the other videos where I've explained that, looking at the demand and the supply curve. Okay, so if you get to this wonderful equilibrium point here, then what we're saying is it's a very unique point because you have now maximized the amount of surplus, both the surpluses together, and so that's when your economic welfare is maximized at this equilibrium point here. So one way to see that is, well, what happens if your market stopped producing below that point, let's say point A? Well, let's have a little look at point A. If we stop producing here, question is, should? It's always a good question. Should we increase our output here? And the argument is, yes, we should, because the marginal benefit would exceed the marginal cost down here. Okay, and so here marginal benefit is bigger than marginal cost, so your welfare would be rising. Well, what about this point here, if the market reduced beyond that QE? So let's put this in green. So the market now produces down here. Well, by going from here to here, should we have done that? And the answer is no, we shouldn't, because the marginal cost has exceeded the marginal benefit, and so your welfare is now starting to fall after that point there. And that's really important in the whole market. You'll see that in terms of the whole economy, you'd be better off producing more at this point here, but if you go beyond it, you should be producing less to get to this maximum point here. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what we mean by the surpluses and welfare. Now in the next section we're going to have a quick look at how those surpluses change, and we'll take them one at a time. Okay, we'll do the consumer surplus first, and we'll say what happens to the consumer surplus when demand rises. So I've given you a shift in demand. So this is the old surplus. You should always find the old surplus and then say what's the new surplus. Well, the new surplus is being drawn out here for you, and there it is. So this is the old surplus here. Okay, and what's the new surplus? It's much bigger because the vertical distance is the same because you've simply shifted up the demand curve like that. And the horizontal is obviously bigger, so this horizontal part of it is bigger than the old surplus. Now, if you want to look at then the difference in those consumer surplus, you've got to do something quite important, which is you take the idea that there is an element here, okay, which is this line here, this element here, that there is consistent in both triangles. Okay, now therefore we have lost this area there, but we have gained that area there, and so again you can see that the that gain area is bigger than the lost area, and so that will give you the idea that the consumer surplus has increased. Well, what happens if it moves down, if demand goes down? So now we're talking about demand shifting inwards. What's the effect on the consumer surplus? So again, here it was, there it is there. What is it now? There it is. And so the consumer surplus is going to be smaller. Okay, how do we know that? Well, let's draw in this consistent area here. This is the old, that's where the old surplus and the new surplus are the same area. So we have lost this surplus bit here, we've lost that bit, but we have gained that bit there. And so therefore the loss is bigger than the gain, and so the surplus will decrease. So those are awkward ideas to look at when you do that. And sometimes they come up in multiple choice questions. What happens then about the producer surplus? Well, here we have it. That's the old producer surplus. There it is. What's the new one? There it is. It's been drawn for you, and it's that area there. So the old one was underneath it here. I'll try and draw it in again for you there. That was the old one there, and so that's the new one there in red, and so this area here is simply your gain in producer surplus. What about when demand falls? Well, again, take the old one. There's the old surplus. Where's the new one? There it is, being drawn for you there, and immediately I think you should be able to see that this area here is a loss of producer surplus when demand falls. Okay, what about when supply changes? Well, let's have another look at those. So this is an example, supply is falling. This is the old consumer surplus. Here it is, there's your new consumer surplus being drawn for you. And so you can see that that distance there, that box there rather, is the loss of consumer surplus in the marketplace, a loss of welfare. Okay. What about when the supply increases? So supply is increased. Where's your new? There it is there. Okay, and we could say that before we did that, This was the old consumer surplus. So this area here is the gain in the surplus that you're going to get in that marketplace. What about if the producer surplus changes when supply changes? Well, here we have it again. This is the old producer surplus. What's the new one going to be? Well, go back to your equilibrium, find the price and find your supply curve. Let's draw it in for you. There it is. And so again, this triangle here is what we call is shared in both of those triangles. So we could ignore that. Then, if that's the old surplus, we've lost this area, but we have gained this area here. And so again, the producer surplus would fall. And what about finally when supply rises? Well, here we go. You've got the old surplus here. This is going to be your new surplus. And so I'm drawing it out for you. There it is. And again, this triangle here is a consistent triangle. So that one is the same in both of those triangles. This is lost because that's the old surplus, and this is gained, and so you'd have a gain overall in the surplus. So always look for the old triangle, the new triangle, and then try and find the areas which have been lost or gained to give you the change in the producer or the consumer surplus. Hopefully that's helpful.